All right, there will probably be people joining in and out as usually during these webinars. A warm welcome to everyone to the Good After COVID-19 Finland chapter. This is the 6th webinar that we are honored to have. A happy new year to everyone. It has been a very exciting year last year, and this excitement seems to continue at least to some extent this year as well. The good thing that we can say from our part is that there has been a lot of very interesting learning opportunities related to all of this with COVID. And in many places they say that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So that's of course also a good thing. But probably many good learning opportunities still, and that's why we're here today. Today's agenda will have a short introduction on the practicalities that I'll be taking care of. My name is Tiina Karme. Then we have an opening speech from Kim Karme. Then we have Professor Leonardo Conte, who will talk a bit about Doughnut Economy. And he's at the moment, I think you're in Switzerland, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Lugano.
And then we have Measuring Impact from Elia Divey, and he's also in Switzerland at the moment. And then we have Sustainability and Law, Anna Kuusniemilaine. She's here in the office with us, so she will be speaking under my name, but don't let that confuse you. And she's from Finland. And then we'll have a panel discussion where we have a moderator, Ara Tähtinen, and then we have Kim and also Herbert Lundström that will be participating in the panel. Very happy to say that it seems to be that the world is coming to Finland because we have a lot of countries and a lot of people from around the world that are showing interest in our Good After COVID Finland initiative, which is of course very nice. And due to this trend, we also want to say that if any of you have an interest in starting a similar webinar series in your country, we're very happy to support you and help you. There are great opportunities to learn from each other, and a challenge like this and other challenges in the future will absolutely require us to learn from each other and these type of dialogues. So we're very happy about this. And then, without further ado, I'll give it to Kim.
Thank you, Tiina. So it's my great pleasure to wish you all welcome this morning. So, and it's an honor to open the 6th Good After COVID-19 Finland webinar. And as it is called, we started this as a Finnish event. I think we even had the second event in Finnish language, but this has become international. We have participants from more than 30 countries and all continents, except Antarctica. And that makes me ask why, or actually why not? At least for me, this has been an interesting and learning journey. The interest of the Good After COVID-19, actually the learnings from COVID-19 clearly show that when there is a global threat, we get unified in search for solutions. The COVID-19 became very rapidly a huge threat. It also looks like we rapidly have found a solution. At least we feel so today. We're facing a far more destructive, but perhaps a slower visible threat, the climate change. So during this spring, we will focus on looking if any of the knowledge we have gained can be useful for meeting the challenges of the climate change. Welcome to participate and enjoy the discussions. Thank you.
The following speaker will be Leonardo Conte. He's a professor at Franklin University, but he does a lot of other things, and he knows a lot about the Doughnut economy. So please do not hesitate to ask difficult questions and really dig into this with his support.
An honor for me. And so today I'm gonna talk about Doughnut economics. And I won't explain you this title right now, but it will become clear through the presentation. So yes, Tina said I'm professor at Franklin University, Switzerland, and I'm also a co-founder of Rethink Economics Switzerland, which is actually a student and faculty network. It's a global network, but this is the Swiss branch of this community, and I will tell you eventually more about towards the end. Yeah, so I've been asked, among other things, to show you what's the Doughnut Economics is, and I will do this through trying to kind of linking this both to let's say the mainstream approaches to economics before the Doughnut, and climate change, of course, as an issue. So the idea in general, there has been a lot of economic growth models throughout history, especially since the 50s, but most of them didn't tackle the issue of climate change, of course, but especially I want to highlight the relationship of those models to with the climate itself, so with the planet and nature. So how those models considered the planet, the planetary boundaries, etc. And the answer, the brief answer here is we cannot, of course, go through each of them, but let's say the brief answer here is that until the 90s, actually, no growth model considered the impacts on the climate, on the planet itself. The only model that did so was this so-called environmental Kuznets curve, which is based on another previous growth model, that basically through some statistical evidence with a lot of defeats and lags, was showing that at the beginning of your growth process, which is measured by the x-axis, so the GDP per capita, you can allow for environmental degradation up to a point where, the story goes, you will become, the country will become rich enough that can allow for, sustainable concerns and caring about also other stuff like, outside economic activity, so the nature and planet itself. So this has been the main rhetoric in the area of environmental economics for a while. But the whole idea of this, the planet and the nature being external to the economic valuable activities comes from the concept of negative externality, which is what you found in the title. So here you can see the, let's say, the standard definition of an externality in general, but especially of a negative externality. I won't go deep into that, but it's the key point here is to realize that the externality and the negative externality is something that it's an impact of an economic valuable activities. Its impact on something else outside which is conceived as the economic activity. So most of the time, if it's negative, of course, it's a cost. And if it's a positive externality, is actually a positive impact on something outside of the economic activity, which can be, as here says generally, a third party, but it can include the society as a whole, society's welfare, or other specific parts of the society, individuals and companies, or etc. So generally, we're talking here about a negative externality that has an externality that has a negative effect on society's welfare, and to our concerns, this is what climate change. So pollution, you can think about greenhouse gases, etc. But we can go a bit deeper into that by saying that what generally economists believe and treat are market failures. So negative externality is a way a specific way of conceptualizing one example of a bigger category of market failures. So those market failures happen when in general, free market do not maximize society's welfare, and you need something to fix those. So this kind of concept is really central to mainstream economics. And the point here is that in this framework, so with this conceptual framework, those polluting activities are justified to be considered negative externalities. So the whole point of presenting you this concept is to tell you how mainstream economics usually treated and to some extent still treats conceptually climate change as a negative externality indeed. So the fact here is that that's because most of the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions of whatever economic activity do not fall on within the activities. By these, I mean that they are considered to be outside, conceptually outside the economic activity. So they're not embedded in a cost, for example. I mean that's how it has always been so far. And so, for instance, my individual action of driving my car at a systemic level is causing damages for everyone else. So in this case, we're talking climate change, so it's a society's welfare issue, and global issue. It doesn't necessarily, it's not a negative externality that necessarily picks one part of the society. So those issues are particularly hard to tackle because there's a gap not only between my individual action and the systemic level, so the effects that this externality has on the systemic level, but especially because usually those costs are also detached in time. So there's a problem of not only space, but also those costs and the effects of those negative externalities are delayed on time. And those responsible for those, for example, costs in the present usually are not asked to pay the cost within their balance sheet, right, within their economically valuable activities as a cost. So one solution, and this has been the typical solution so far, would be to penalize those activities. So to actually put taxes and put costs in the balance sheet of this business. Some people say that has not been this has not been one of the greatest solution, and so far there has not been major achievement going in this direction. But some other people hopefully see that as a thing as a solution, as a possible solution. So here I will do a 2 slides digression to show to guide you towards the second solution, which is, so this is a typical psychological example where you can see either a duck or a rabbit, right? And depending how you let's say you approach the picture, or if you're able to switch your brain from one perspective to the other one, you can then see one or the other one, but you cannot actually see both of them at exactly same time. I mean, that's the whole psychological theory behind. So this is what is called in psychology a tipping point. So there has been studies showing that, and it's pretty it's a psychological trick. But I put these here to show that there's different ways of looking at the same problems, and it's often a matter of how you frame the problem that you can find different solutions. So there's each solution has has one perspective put upon, and you can, by switching the perspective, you can not only see the problem differently, but you can actually find solutions that are in a different realm, conceptual realm. So that's the importance of changing paradigms and actually evolving theories behind the mainstream in academia, but not only for the sake of science, but especially for the impacts that this can have in policy and businesses. So another solution to put green, to the carbon emission taxes, for example, would be actually to change the framework in which policymakers, practitioners, and business think about those issues. And doing so would require to change their education. There's a famous quote from Keynes saying that any practical man actually who believes themselves to be quite exempt from an intellectual influence, so from theory itself, are usually the slaves of some defunct economy. So this means that, first and most of the time, those policy and business activities rely on some manager's education and background, who most of the time studied something similar to economics. And these, so by changing the main framework that these Geiger studied at the beginning, then you can change in the future the impact of his or her activities by changing the framework itself and the mindset, therefore, by which he reasons. So this has been a whole stream of research. Again, it's called the performativity of economics. So basically, those guys study how economists, so economics, the discipline itself, shape management practices and policies according to the models and the concept they use. So they're non-neutral, but they can actually shape markets and realities. So that's what I was saying before. Education can play here a crucial role, and it can, even with its own delayed impact key issue here, but it has a crucial role in shaping the minds of the future. So by changing the models that you teach and you actually provide to those policy and business makers, then you're actually using theory in a very practical way to shape the real world. So this is what the association in which I've been working on does, and there's a whole concept, of pluralist economics, and like fostering basically interdisciplinary research and other approaches, exactly to promote these lateral thinking, and especially heterodox theories, which do not rely merely on the mainstream that has been taught in university, but not only, also in applied sciences institutes, etc. So this brief digression was to show you how theories, which often seems something very abstract and detached from the real world, can actually, if used properly, can actually have it's kind of the key to think differently and to approach problems in a different way. So, said that, you could argue that there's another solution to the problem I was talking about before, which is changing the framework, as I said, right? So there has been different ways to do that, but what we are talking about today, it's one of them, which is called the Doughnut Economics, and this started by a British economist in 2017, who is also part of the Think Economics, by the way. This is the title of the book, 7 Ways to Think Like 21st Century Economy. So what she tried to do actually should debunk some of the main pillars of the old way of the standard, basically, way of doing economics and environmental economics, especially. kind of, rethink the way in which the economy is perceived by economists. So to conceive the whole framework of what an economy is and what economics should look like, and what at the end economists do. So the whole Doughnut that I'll show you in a moment, it's a model that basically implies an economy which is embedded in a bounded natural system. So it's visually embedded, and this has not been in the past has not been treated as such. But as I told you, there was this concept of negative externality going mainstream. So there was not such visual system in the social sciences. I mean, there were other systems like this in the natural sciences, like biology, geology, etc. So what she did is she took one of those systems, and then she put, I'll show you now, she put another inner circle to add the social foundations on top of the planetary boundaries. So this is the title of her main TED talk. So she, I mean, among the various concepts and definitions that she tried to change and switch from the old economics, then she introducing also this concept of thriving that basically goes in the direction of being detached by the hunger for growing, at every cost. And so there's this, this is one of the most important shifts that she did from growing to thriving. And another, basic and as a background, another basic insight here is not to think micro, but actually having macroscopic laws that allow big picture to think systemically and especially long term. So she's trying, by changing the framework of in which economists think, to embed those, as we were talking before, those systemic issues that are kind of sometimes neglected, and the temporal dimension, so the long-term thinking, which is also usually neglected in the market failure mainstream economics framework. And here, instead, planetary boundaries are at the same level as individual civil rights, and you can see it here, which is finally the main picture of her model, so the Doughnut itself. That she took these ecological ceilings, so this outer circle, from a natural scientist, and she added upon this inner circle, which she calls the social foundation. So in the outer circle, you can see basically the areas in which so far humanity has been overshooting in different dimensions and in different countries with different impacts, of course. But those areas on the outer circle can become more or less red. And those means with the natural scientist language that we are overshooting the ecological ceiling. And so she embedded these outer circle in the in the economic model, basically. And so here the economy becomes embedded by those planetary boundaries, because then in the inner circle you have what she calls the social foundation. That's what she contributed mainly in the picture, in the model itself, and those are the areas, the basic civil rights and the basic needs that everyone should access to in a healthy world. So that's what, I mean, she called it the Doughnut for obvious reasons. So you have those two circles, and then in the middle of those two circles, you have these safe and just space for humanity, as she calls it. But the main key point here is that by adopting this framework, so by actually having the big picture of whatever activities, economic valuable activities you're doing, not overshooting ecological ceiling and not shortfalling the social foundation, you're actually shaping the way in which business runs, because you're even in an abstract way here, but in practice this turns into having in the mindset of those managers and those marketeers the reminder of staying in that donut. So you, in a way, you could say that she embedded those kind of costs that previously were named and conceived only as negative externality by the mainstream theory, etc., as in the activity itself, within the activity itself. So another way of calling externalities has always been with the name spillover effects. And in economics, again, this has always usually been associated with negative actions or negative spillover effects, slightly different than externality, but it's a similar concept. In finance, for example, they define it when there's a war or an event in one country that has a ripple effect on the economy of another one. But you could think that this model of the Doughnut economics actually was designed. I mean, the design in which the model was done actually allows for positive spillover effects, meaning that by tackling one issue, either of the inner circle or the outer circle, you're actually having positive spillover effects on other slices. So that's what happened usually when you tackle one issue of the donut. You can, you want either to reduce or overshoot, reduce the overshoot of the ecological ceiling, or prevent the shortfall of the social foundation. But by this model, I mean, with this model in mind, and working with this systemic big picture in front of you, you can actually, and this has been shown by various experiments. And various practical example, that actually policies can have eventually, by adjusting one single slice, have positive impacts upon other slices of the donut. So this is again, those impacts can eventually be measured, and that's what Elia will talk about later. But the point here is to show you that, by changing the framework, so by not considering climate change as a negative externality and greenhouse gases as a cost that cannot be embedded that is not embedded in the economic activity. So by changing this to actually having a framework that visually embeds them, you can have policies that tackle one issue by having eventual positive impacts upon other slices of the cake. So the final point here, and you'll be able also to find more in the web. There's different sources that I can also provide to you. But generally, when the Doughnut economics has been applied in practice, the main takeaways are the policymakers and business could first catch this big picture and endorse the power of positive spillover effects, as I was saying. So tackling one slice doesn't prevent you to have positive spillovers on other slices of the donut, and eventually, put aside be detached by the negative externalities framework. So actually embedding those costs in the activity, and last but not least, avoid falling into what is called the status quo bias. So actually being kind of nudged by the model itself to change the way in which you think not only climate change as a systemic issue, but especially the costs and of your business activity, for instance. So I hope I was clear enough in such a brief time, but that's the end of my talk.
The following speaker that we have is Elia, and I'll allow Elia to introduce himself again more in detail, but he's also a fellow student of me at the UNITAR education related to international management with a focus on responsible management and climate impact. So it will be very interesting to see what he has to present. Go ahead, Elia.
Thank
and we
you.
can
Good
see
morning.
your slides.
Good morning. You can see the slides? So let's start right away. If we continue to do business as we do right now, there are 6 years and 11 months left until the CO2 budget of the Paris Agreement is depleted. After this, we have to capture the CO2 in the air to undo the damage. So it's really time to act right now. And as you can see, this carbon clock here from the Mercator Institute is showing exactly this topic. So it's showing that we have these 6 years and 11 months left. And I took this picture yesterday evening, so it's really counting down the carbon. Now, as you heard from Leonardo before, we have to start to move towards the doughnut economy. And the basis of the economy, of course, is the financial system. When the financial system was created in the end of the 19th century, it was based on an abundance of resources. They were not really thinking about limits, and therefore the system was created to have endless growth. But now we see the limits of this system, and we see that we are living in a world with limited resources and that we have to take care of these resources. Therefore, a transformation is needed in the financial system, as we heard before, in the whole economy, or maybe we could call it a little bit less dramatic, a correction is needed. And as Leonardo explained before, one of the main steps is about the externalities. So if I speak about externalities, I mean the CO2 pollution, I mean the water usage, and I mean the air pollution, which means that these planetary boundaries, these limits of our planet, are not calculated into the financial system. And currently it does not reflect the real prices we use. So we have to add these externalities into our price calculation to start to do business sustainably. To turn all the processes, we have to start monetize climate change, because this is like a lever. So if there's more money in the sustainability and the climate change topic, then it also becomes interesting for investors. And therefore, this new area was born called sustainable finance. Until now, the money in sustainability was very little. So you can see, as Tina said, I'm from Switzerland. 10 years ago, we had 32 billion Swiss francs in sustainable investments. Now, 10 years later, we had a growth rate of 3,500%, and we are in 1,163 billion by the end of 2019. So this is maybe also a little hint where you can invest into the future. And so in sustainable finance and doughnut economy, the impact of a company, of course, is very relevant. And now I would like to share some insights with you that I gained at the Sustainable Finance Hackathon, which was quite an interesting event where people from all over the world came together, and we used the so-called collective intelligence to solve some issues within a very short amount of time, some issues that companies or some governments posed us, and we try to solve them within 24 hours. So as I said, in sustainable finance, the impact of a company is very relevant. And I would like to show you a little bit the differences from the terms that we hear here. On the left side, you see there are these traditional businesses, which are currently around 90% of today's economy. And then there are the impact businesses on the right side, which are 10% of today's economy. And when it comes to measuring the impact of the company, you often hear this term called ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and corporate governance, which refers to the three central factors in measuring the sustainability and societal impact of an investment in a company or business. And so here the ESG is really focusing on the processes within a company, whereas the impact is focused on the output of a company. So it's similar to a certain extent, but in the end, it's still quite different. So here are maybe a few relevant names to know which landscape the impact measurement space. So first of all, if we have a look here at the left side on the ESG data, you see there's this, in the gray box, there is the first one, the so-called GRI, which is the Global Reporting Initiative, which are international independent standards. Then there's from the United Nations, which is the so-called Global Compact, which is a United Nations pact of policies to measure the processes of the companies if they are acting sustainably within the company. And there's another one, for example, the TCFD, which is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is more focused on the financial information and the risk of this transition phase that we are having at the moment for the climate change, where many businesses have to face within the next 5 to 25 years. Then if we go to the right side, so if we're focusing on impact businesses, which are more focused on their output, so what is their impact on the planet, on the output of their business acting, are these impact businesses. And if we have a look at the gray box again, on the bottom right, we see the impact data, for example, the GIIRS, which is a global impact investment rating system. Then it's very small. The second one, I don't think you can see it, but it's a KPI, which is the social ROI. So it's maybe a more exhaustive, more integrative social return on investment. And then we have the IRIS, which is a catalog of metrics for impact. Now, let's have a look maybe at the benefits and the limitations of ESG data. First of all, it produces a score that is easy to integrate in a decision-making process. So a company, if it does an ESG assessment, it gets a score, it sees where it stands, and it can see very clearly which measures it has to take or not. Whereas the second aspect is many companies are doing this already now to a certain extent. It's really just starting off, and it provides a very large coverage of companies. And the analysis is made by trusted experts. What the limitations are, it usually lacks in time. Sometimes some of these measurements are not even set up yet. So time was not measured until now, so it has to start to be measured from now on. Or it can be that we have data from many years ago or from the last few years. So it's really not live and live data that we can access. And since the process can be costly to a certain extent, it's usually reserved to paying clients. And as I said before, it mainly focuses on the practices. So on the CSR, the corporate sustainable responsibility, and not the broader picture. So it really focuses on the processes within the company. And the data comes from the companies themselves, which means it can be slightly subjective. Now, what does it mean in practice? What does it mean in practice? Let's make a little example here. So I took two companies here, Neste Oil, I hope I said it right. It's a Finnish oil company with Nordex, which is producing windmills. And now my question to you will be, what do you think? Which one is having the higher ESG rating? So which one is more sustainable in the sense of ESG and has a better score? I thought it's Nordex, but as you can see here, it's Neste has a score of 83 and Nordex has a score of 68. Let's take another example here. for example, with Embraer, which is, I think it's the fourth biggest airplane producer in the world after Airbus and Boeing and these big ones, against Tesla, which both are in the transportation sector. And here again, if we have a look at the ESG scores, we see that Embraer is having a much better ESG score. So they have a score of 63, whereas Tesla only has a score on 17. So you see that it sometimes doesn't really reflect the output of a company, but really focuses on the processes inside. So yeah, my message of today is I want you to keep in mind the difference between the impact of a company and ESG. ESG focuses on the processes inside the company, whereas impact measurement focuses on the output of a company, which can be very different. I think it's very important that companies start to screen their processes, but it's also important that we have a look at the output of a company. So I think personally a mix of both is best if we start to assess this. Now, in the next few months of my master's, we have to do a project. And if you're interested to measure the impact of your company or assess the risk in this transition phase, or you have another interesting sustainability project, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much.
Introducing Anna Kuusniemi-Laine, who is a very appreciated lawyer from Finland, working for. So first of all, I would like to thank for this opportunity to speak about sustainability and law, which is a subject that is very close to my heart. I've been working with business law for more than 25 years now, with a focus on competition law, public procurement, and European law. And it was actually originally through sustainable public procurement that I became interested in sustainability issues also in more general. I'm speaking today from a practicing business lawyer's perspective, but I believe that some of what I discuss or tell you from my point of view today is also applicable to consultants as well. So what is the role of lawyers in the current situation where the planetary boundaries have been exceeded in many respects, as we just heard? But on the other hand, the members of the UN have agreed on 17 sustainable development goals, which could be described as the closest we have to a world strategy. I believe there will be big changes in how companies operate, and obviously this will create also quite a lot of work for lawyers. Just a bit of background from the Finnish perspective, how Finnish companies generally see sustainability. In quite a recent research, 99% of companies consider sustainability important for business. 62% told that they seek reputation and brand benefits through corporate responsibility. Already more than half of companies are integrating SDGs in their strategy, which is quite a lot. Companies call for legislators to promote sustainable development. The majority of the respondents believe that global challenges should be solved primarily through legislation and through international agreements. I don't have any official data on how this COVID pandemic has affected the situation, but there's this general feeling that sustainability issues have become even more important during the pandemic. So how is this affecting the role of lawyers? First of all, some things will not change. First of all, lawyers are there to protect the rule of law. And this will not change. This is, by the way, also part of SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. The current legal system also provides protection for agreements that may be detrimental to the environment.
The current system, of course, also allows also wrongdoers to have access to legal support. So this means that the question of the lawyer's role from the sustainability perspective is not always very easy. But on the other hand, our role does not need to stop there. We can also propose corrective measures. In the future, lawyers will be dealing with new types of risks. Obviously, there are environmental issues, but there may be new issues with artificial intelligence, unsustainable use of data, etc. And an important issue is that lawyers will need to start applying soft law. And by this, I refer to, for instance, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. So why is this important? Well, the human rights conventions are binding on states, on governments, but not directly on businesses. Businesses follow the national law. But there are these soft law instruments that give a recommendation and a kind of a standard to how especially multinational companies operating in different countries, how they should treat human rights, for instance. And if we think about these golden days of social media and how consumers react, for instance, to human rights abuses, it's very clear that this is a major risk also for companies if we think about reputation and brand. And I believe these are the risks that also lawyers need to understand. Sometimes it's in practice the press or the general public that will deliver the verdict, while the court proceedings may take years and years, and maybe national law was not even violated, although there was a clear human rights violation. Business lawyers are not very good at applying soft law instruments at the moment, but I believe this will have to change. There is also new corporate responsibility legislation coming in the coming years. There is already binding legislation in some countries. There is also a national initiative in Finland, but I believe EU will be most likely also in the driver's seat in the future. There's an initiative concerning directors' liability on the way, as well as initiatives concerning due diligence on human rights violations and environmental issues. So new legislation is coming. Lawyers could take a proactive role in thinking about solutions to sustainability questions. They could be new financing models, new structures, new instruments, but sometimes just maybe the new type of use of existing regulations. So there may be some rules that where the interpretation can change over time, and sustainability issues could be one reason to change the application of certain rules. And I think that's something that lawyers sometimes would need to push a little bit. But most importantly, lawyers need a new mindset. Sustainability needs to be our business as well, if we want to be the strategic speaking partners of the management. Sometimes this means that we may need to pose difficult questions. We may need to ask how some transaction would look like from the perspective of the people or the planet, and how future generations would see the transactions that we are planning today. I believe it will not always be an easy task. But I still believe that lawyers who adopt the new role will have new business and will have a lot of meaningful new type of work. So some practical examples of the future work of lawyers interested in sustainability issues. I could give a presentation of each of the bullet points. I don't have the time for that, but I will just make a few points here. First of all, corporate governance will be affected. We will be talking about sustainable corporate governance in the future. If we look at M&A transactions, for instance, sustainable companies buying companies will want to know whether there are human rights abuses or whether there are environmental law problems. I know this work is done already now, but I think there will be an increase in that area. There's a lot to do in green finance, in sustainable finance, in impact investing, like in social impact bonds, something that we have tried in Finland already. A lot to do in the energy sector with the renewable energy, circular economy, a lot to do with energy efficiency projects, etc. If we look at employment law, we are also talking about human rights. Also, we sometimes miss that perspective because employment law is very much applying the national law, but behind the national law, you can find the human rights rules as well. I will give you an example of a competition law issue in a moment, so I will come back to that. There's a big issue with the sustainable public procurement. So how are we using 18% of GDP, which goes to public procurement contracts? Is that used in a sustainable way? Are we promoting green objectives? Are we promoting social objectives? A lot to do in that area as well, also with state aid. There are completely new questions in the area of data protection and the sustainable use of data, legal aspects of artificial intelligence, etc. And of course, all of this may have an impact on compliance and investigations and finally litigation. And I believe these are just examples. So, so far I haven't been able to identify a field of business law that would be totally unaffected by the sustainability questions. Then a bit broader question on who and how should we promote sustainable application of the law. So if the current law prevents application of sustainable practices, who should speak up if not lawyers? And I'll give you an example of an existing discussion. Could chocolate producers agree together to pay fair prices for cocoa farmers to abolish the use of child labor and stop deforestation? The common sense answer most likely would be, of course, they are able to do that, and they even should do that. But this would lead to increasing consumer prices, and this would lead to a problem under the current cartel prohibition and its current interpretation. Now there's a question pending. Could there be a possibility to change that interpretation? This has to do with the European Green Deal and the fact that sustainable practices should have or should be involved in all the policy areas of the European Union. And also the companies have let the Commission know that there are problems like this. There are trade unions, there are practitioners who have told the Commission that we have a problem in the rules. Companies would like to do more in cooperation, because sometimes if you do a change alone, then you have the first mover disadvantages, and it may not be financially beneficial because the competitors who don't have their sustainable practices are then better off in competition. So this is an example of a discussion of whether we should and how we should change the current interpretation of existing rules. And this discussion with the DG Competition with the Commission continues in February. And this is just an example. I believe there are many more cases where we need to also kind of have a voice in the society and say that there are problems with the current law and this needs to be changed. So a few words about sustainability in law firms. The traditional aspect has been quite narrow, mostly to do some work to promote equality and then to do pro bono work. But if we think about the impact that lawyers could have in the society, it becomes much bigger if we really focus on advising our clients in their sustainability goals. That is where we can really have a big impact, I believe. And then by participating in this societal and social debate, we can also have or get our own views and findings heard. I believe it's good to have a framework for the sustainability work, also for smaller firms. Our firm joined the UN Global Compact, which is the world's largest company sustainability initiative. And I believe the experience has been quite good, and also the reporting requirements are not so heavy. But that is something that I would strongly recommend to lawyers and consultants, and it also kind of brings us closer to our clients, customers who are dealing with the very similar issues. So lawyers are, I believe, only in the beginning of this sustainability journey, and we do have a lot to learn. But as lawyers and also consultants are involved in so many transactions all the time, all over the world. And then I believe that if we have this change in the mindset, then we can have a really great potential to make a positive impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I think that most of us are very much in the beginning of this journey, and this is a great opportunity to learn together. So this is a good invitation to that.
One thing that interests me is what is the current status of implementation thinking like Doughnut Economics? And I think that will be for you, Leonardo.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, that's a very good question. I didn't put in my theoretical presentation practical examples, but it's nice that you asked me now. There are many examples in Europe already. So one leading country in, let's say, the public sector side of the policy applications of the Doughnut is the Netherlands. So Amsterdam has, let's say, been kind of redesigned with this circular economic approach by its enlightened majors. And there's other examples in the UK. That's where the Doughnut has has its origin, and there's a few examples in other parts, of course, of the world, not only in Europe. But the challenge, I think, now is also to translate, the applications of the Doughnut from the policy and the public sector, which is already kind of growing, to at least in the West, to the business sector. So to the business side, more at the micro level, but still probably it would have eventually even more impact for the issues we discussed before, also with Elia.
Can you elaborate a little more about the potential obstacles for the implementation? Of course, the concept itself has been fairly recently introduced, so that may be one of them. But any other ones that you can think of?
So I think to my let's say, according to me, the main issue with any groundbreaking model as the Doughnut is, which especially in economics, so especially in things that matter for policy and business, in the implementation is, as I briefly mentioned, path dependency and status quo bias generally. So path dependency at the broad level means that, you know, we've always relied on certain practices and certain ways of doing things. Like for, you know, like for switching technology, you can argue the same thing for switching models and conceptual frameworks at more at the systemic level, let's say. And then individual level, yeah, the status quo bias is the same thing translated at the individual level. So let's say, yeah, I mean, I always did this way. It worked for my, let's say, indicators and my perspective. So why should I change, and etc. So the cost of like switching from one model and therefore practice to another one, I think is the let's say major cost in the short term, and major probably obstacle in the short term. Then in the long term, there probably going to be other like the one of education I said before. So those process, especially if you start from the education, take a lot of time, and to face issues like climate change, this might be a problem.
The first question that I had in mind was related to the if you say universe of the various reporting standards and guidelines and resources that are available. There seem to be more than over 2,000 of them, and I guess the question is that, can we expect consolidation of those requirements that would make it easier for companies at the business level to concentrate on things on the one hand, and then comparability on the other hand as well?
Right, yeah, maybe I can answer on this one. What I see definitely is there is a certain, like you're very right, they're popping up new measurements, new reporting schemes almost every day. And I think it's, at the moment, it's really a little bit a run, like who is the one who will be the one that can make it the biggest, make it most comparable. But on the other hand, also all these little ones are sometimes very specialized for a certain business topic or a certain business area. So they of course also add some value. And like I said, I think currently, if it comes to this transition risk element, to this transition risk within the next 5 to 20 years, so all these challenges that climate change or onboarding the companies to the climate change is posing us is very relevant. So that's why I think this TCFD, this task force on climate related disclosures, is relevant. Then there's one that is very much known at the moment, which is really also globally acting, and is for small up to very big companies, is the B movements. Maybe you heard about the B Lab, the B Corporation, the B certificate. It's all flowing into this direction. Or the one that Anna was mentioning before, the UN Global Compact, which are really policies and also have some reporting schemes. And I think what is maybe important whenever we see a sustainability report or a certain score or something, I think it's, as always, if we have a look at reports, we have to ask ourselves, how was it measured? So what was measured behind, and what is the message behind it? So what does it want to tell us?
Maybe just a short note that there's an ongoing reform in the EU concerning the non-financial reporting directive, and it's finally going to be called sustainability reporting.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So I think that's something just to follow what happens there.
that standard has at least something.
Exactly. There also seems to be interest in the financial world regarding IFRS and IASB, which are looking at sustainability standards board. But as far as I understand, no decisions yet. I don't know if Ilya, you have more information on that.
Right. Yeah, I think it's once again, it's one of these movements that is really happening. And what I think is interesting in that aspect, it's we see that there's a movement into this direction. So I think that's maybe the most important message behind. And what I see is really many companies, maybe that's also a little bit a question of how to address this whole topic to the shareholders, because this is, of course, quite expensive. Sometimes these investments have to be made. But here, once again, I think the ones that are a little bit ahead of time, so the ones which are innovative, which are trying to implement it already right now, will see the benefits on the long term. So it's not a short-term thinking that it asks right now, because it will not pay out itself the next 1 or 2 years. But if we make business on the long term, then maybe more and more businesses are getting into this long-term thinking, then we really see differences. Because also, for example, I see in policies, we see these green borders coming up, meaning like the European Union that says we're going to shut us down for high carbon products, or the United States with the new administration said they just joined again the Paris Agreement, and they also said that they really want to create a market that is for sustainability. And here is also the whole carbon pricing coming into. So these are also all measurements that are going into a long-term thinking and really trying to foster the long-term thinking for all the companies. And I think that's an interesting movement in this direction.
Leonardo, I see you nodding a lot. Do you have any further comment?
I think Elia also subtly pointed out something important as well, which is the same argument I made for theories. You can make it for methods and therefore impact measurement. So meaning that the way in which you measure things, in this case, sustainable impacts, it matters. And of course, who designs those measurements, so whether it's the EU or an independent NGO or whatever it can be, it changes in the way, as Elia also showed us with 2 of them, it changes in the way, it changes the results. So the same argument I made for theory, like changing the framework, matters in terms of practice. The same thing is for impact measurement. It has those measures have a performative aspects, meaning that if you use one instead of the other, you're actually shaping the practice, because everyone will want to be accounted and best at that mainstream measurement. So it's important to settle the standard for everyone to follow and to choose wisely that standard.
Thank you. There seems to be a point made on the board as well regarding, do you have examples of good practices on impact measurement? The Harvard impact weighted accounts, which then raises the question of, do you think that the monetization of the impact in the accounts one way or another is actually possible and could be one of the directions in reporting in the future?
What I see is what makes it very accessible, for example, with the B certificate or the B corporation, is that the reporting itself is usually free. So like this is like an open source. It's like a shared information, and this makes it accessible to many companies. I think that's very valuable. And usually they rather pay for the service or for the implementation on the project, or what the suggestions could be that the organization can get better. And on the other hand, I think what is rather priced at the moment is the externality, like also Leonardo mentioned in the very beginning. So this is rather the pricing thing instead of the development of the reporting to get priced.
I'll slightly jump in. There's a question that could maybe go to Anna. one part of it is that are there any policies or changes in law that could inspire us, where we see a good change happening? And this is maybe a question for all of you, that what type of collaboration can we see happening partly around this impact measuring, but also around changing policies, changing law or behavior?
Well, I believe there's quite a lot going on at the moment. For instance, in Finland, we just founded a corporate responsibility law association in September this year, and we have these new organizations that are starting a lot of discussion and bringing together lawyers who are interested in the change, and there are similar examples also of course elsewhere. There's an organization called Esg, a global network of lawyers working for social impact. There are organizations like this that bring together people, and there are like the platforms for sharing ideas and sharing good practices that work somewhere else, and also of the legal developments in some countries, which could then be also considered elsewhere.
The accounting aspects, reporting aspects, and some of the discussion earlier also could have some legal implications in terms of the B Corp, for instance, yes. How that might be available, for instance, in Finland.
Yes.
And also regarding, if we think about stakeholder capitalism as opposed to shareholder capitalism, and whether there are any legal aspects that the management or the board or directors, for instance, would have to think about.
Exactly. For the time being, there's actually quite a lot of discussion about the B Corps going on in Finland as well. We don't really have many companies that formally would qualify as B Corps here, but we have a very strong social enterprise sector and also this kind of third sector. So I believe we will see some development there as well. But on the other hand, Finnish companies don't see sustainability as something that would prevent them from doing business. And of course, there's this discussion also on what is the purpose of a company. Is it just to bring profits to the owners, and is that in the short term or in the long term? And how is for instance, not paying attention to environmental questions? Well, how would that affect the director's liability, etc.? So I think in Finland, quite many people are of the view that even if you are not a B corporation, you are still allowed to bring in these sustainability aspects in the business. And for many, it's actually good business to do that, if you take especially the longer perspective. And well, this discussion continues as well.
Very good. So Finland is actually a good place for sustainability to foster, if you will, from a company perspective.
Yes.
The last topic that I wanted to discuss with the time that we have relates then to the implementation of sustainability at the business level. And it seems to me that good sustainability data, in whichever form it comes in, for a company then results easily in a rethinking of their risk position as well as their business strategy. There may be opportunities as well as risks that you need to consider. And then you have to take those to the operations level as well, and perhaps change strategy. Other things will change. A lot of things that in the management and in other levels of the company you have to kind of unlearn, as we discussed almost earlier, in terms of a new economics thinking, as well as then learn new things. And it seems to me that implementation is actually sort of double difficult, in that if you start changing your strategy, on the one hand, you have to do the strategic implementation as usual, but on the other hand, you also have to implement completely new frame of reference within the company and a line of thinking and a management style even perhaps. And I'm wondering whether there are any tools for that kind of transformation.
The way in which the Doughnut so far has been implemented in business is really simply, to provide the picture of the model itself in the rooms of the managers. Like that's as simple as that, because the purpose is changing the perspective of every action they put in place. Of course, this comes at the cost that it's more like it's considered more like an abstract framework rather than a specific concrete procedure, let's say, to act. But what you were saying about the efforts of implementing new frameworks, it exists, but that's another reason why I was saying it's probably a long-term processes fighting those those biases and those established let's say those established procedures. I think though that you can kind of complement one with the other, and you don't really need to I think you can shape the business as usual by adding up and mixing it up with some new insights rather than go in parallel with two different managements, let's say.
I saw a video last week from Simon Sinek. I think you all know him, and he said something very interesting about how businesses are built and what their purpose is. So what he basically said is money is like fuel. So cars, they need fuel, but the purpose of the car is not to buy more fuel. And businesses are the same. The purpose of a business is not to make money, but it's to advance a greater purpose or a cause.
The question is that EU is looking at double materiality in sustainability reporting, meaning outside in and inside out. And the question is that, do we know how this will reflect on companies' responsibilities to its shares and stakeholders?
As I mentioned, there's a reform going on at the moment, and I unfortunately don't have the details of that. So I think this is something that we need to come back to once the reform continues on the EU level.
We are starting with the completely new global economics model, taking that to the level of individual businesses and to the level of actually implementing it throughout the organizations. So thank you, everybody.
We're going to have these webinars over all of spring. So in February, we'll have the next one on unlearning and new learning, which goes quite nicely with the things that has been said here by all of our speakers and during the panel, that we have a lot of things that we need to learn away from. We have a lot of new things to discover. And once we have done that and we think that the job is done, we probably need to repeat it as well. So we're going to try to look into that in our February event. Then, of course, as we're also virtual during this event, we will also again return slightly to the roots where we started off. So with these virtual teams, but virtual teams in trust, how can we do that when we are not necessarily in person? We're getting quite accustomed to it, but maybe looking at that in detail could be a good idea. And we are also planning to have a webinar with all of the participants so far in the Good After COVID, more as a panel discussion with certain topics to touch upon and learn from each other. And Please feel free to reach out to us at any point with ideas, with wishes on topics that we would touch upon, or just to get in touch in order to launch this in your country or on a specific topic. We're very happy and eager to try to support moving both towards a sustainable world, but also past this COVID time and make the most out of all of these learnings. And this has been a great experience, and we're very grateful to our Good After COVID-19 family keeps growing. We hope you will grow with us. Leonardo, thank you so much for your good explanation on the transition that is needed and the viewpoints on Doughnut Economy. Certainly not an easy thing to grasp if it's the first time that you've heard about it, and it will absolutely require more discussion and conversation around it. So thank you for that. Elia, thank you for bravely taking on this difficult topic on how to measure impact. It's a nice area to discover because there's still a lot of work that is needed there, as you brought out, but there are really good things happening. So that's of course interesting, and thank you for briefly pointing out those so that the ones that want to learn more about it know where to look. And Anna, thank you for both challenging the lawyers, but also providing them inspiration with a lot of new ideas and thoughts where we could move in the future, and also encouraging businesses to reach out to the lawyers when they don't necessarily have a legal problem. So also to work on ideas and solutions and collaboration for the future. I think that's a very valuable message to take with us, that lawyers are there to help us not only when we have problems, but related to law, but also in finding new ideas and discovers. And of course to Ara for leading the panel discussion, and a big thank you, warm thank you to all of the participants. We're very happy that you're on this journey with us, and we very much hope that we will have a chance to see you in February again.